Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD for Aros Group, where we're now into our third series where I'm interviewing tech leaders, thought leaders in both the UK and the Netherlands, asking them a bit about their story, thoughts on emerging technology and stuff that's happening right now, and also that career advice to our STEM listeners. So really pleased to have Henrique Boregio with me today. Henrique is the CTO at Primephonic. Primephonic is one of the fastest growing classical music streaming platforms. Think Spotify for classical music, and that's the area that Primephonic are going for, and really, really exciting in the sort of technology they're using. So I'm sure we're going to hear quite a bit of stuff about the work that they're doing, as well as Henrique's thoughts. So Henrique, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, great. And we were saying is it your first day back in the office or
No, actually, our office is officially closed. So we have an office here in Amsterdam for about 45, 50 people.
yeah.
So I'm the only person here right now. So I just came in
Ah,
here to for some quiet space, quiet time.
yeah, fantastic. And well, I guess hopefully we were talking that life is going to get back to normal eventually, but until then, the world of technology is sort of leading the way, isn't it? And as always, it'll be great to find out a bit about your story.
Sure. Let's see. My story with regard to technology. Well, I think I share quite a bit of a similar story to a lot of tech people. I started learning about technology when I was a kid in my teens. So that's where the passion came from. I started basically buying books, reading stuff online. At the early beginnings of online. So this was late 1990s, beginning of 2000s. So that led me to decide my career path. So I studied software engineering in Argentina. I'm originally from Brazil, but I was living in Argentina at the time. I lived about 16, 17 years there. So I studied software engineering there. It's a five-year course there, quite full-time, quite intensive. And then I started basically to build up my career, as a developer, tech lead, that sort of stuff. That led me to about 5 years ago to move to the Netherlands, which is where I'm currently at. I moved to the Netherlands to join a very, very early stage startup called Picnic, which is an online supermarket. It's a bit like a kind of a Dutch, nowadays very popular scale up, but at the time very, very small, very little. So I stayed with them for almost 4 years. I think 3.5 years. In about 2.5 years, I joined Primephonic, which is where I currently work. So, like you said, we're a classical music streaming company. So we focus exclusively on classical music. That's our goal, is kind of to bring the recordings, all of the world's recordings, actually to the streaming platform, right? So that's in high res, and also a catalog that's completely dedicated to classical music. So right now we have about just over 4 million songs in the platform, about 200,000 albums. So that's something that we're very proud of. Took a lot of manual work, a lot of tech also involved to get this to the level it's at. That's basically my career. I think I've been in the industry for about, I don't even know, 10, 15 years, give or take.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's really interesting to know that you've seen the journey already once time over with Picnic, because obviously you said you joined them as a startup, and now they're, I'd almost call them into enterprise level. Their growth has been pretty phenomenal. So what was the journey like there when you first joined a real startup, and that growth over the 3.5 years?
Sure. So I think, yeah, indeed, right now they were one of the lucky companies to actually benefit from COVID. Right, they're in the groceries industry, which they saw an exponential boom together with the other supermarkets. But if we go back in, I think this was 2015 when I first joined them. I think was a very, very small startup. It was, how small was it? It was it was pre-launch, so that means the name Picnic hadn't even been invented yet. They really didn't know what the product was going to be called. So in the very, very kind of early stages. I was one of the first tech hires, which was also nice to see. Very cool to see the company grow in such a way, right? Not only the engineering side, but just the company as a whole, right? To see the different departments kind of being created. First it's just 10, 20 people doing whatever they can, and then suddenly there's the HR department, there's engineering, different teams within engineering. So that was also quite a journey, I think, to see the needs of the engineering team kind of evolve over time, right? I mean, it's one thing to build an MVP with 10, 15 engineers. Then it's completely different once you launch it and you find out that, well, you actually have users depending on that product. Then your engineering team goes to 20, 30, 50, 80, 100. And it's I think just like any startup, you're always kind of playing catch up, right? You're always late somehow, right? You always need to be evolving. So I think that was quite a learning curve, to see also, the need to formalize things at the engineering side, of course, right, to make things a bit more stable, not so much of a kind of a wild west, right? When you start a company, you're building a product, you're kind of doing a bunch of things. The needs also evolve over time. So I think that was quite an experience. I would recommend anybody who wants to get kind of 10 years of learning condensed into a couple of years, to try to find these early stage startups. And if you're lucky, they might succeed, right? And if you're not lucky, you also learn a lot, right?
Well, and that's such a positive attitude on it, isn't it? You learn more by your mistakes as much as your successes, I always think, especially in technology, because it's continuous learning. It evolves so quickly. I don't really think there's a bad experience when you're embracing tech.
Yeah, no, I also don't think so. I think we're being in the tech industry, we're also lucky that the demand for engineering has been high, right?
Yeah.
So I think that means I think we can also we can be a little bit more risk takers, right? And just, if you join a company and it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world, right? Yeah. I think we've seen this hiring boom in tech for probably the past decade or a couple of decades. So I'm not sure it's going to last forever, but it seems to be going strong.
That's it. I think with the rise of AI and machine learning, people talk about how much can be automated and how does the jobs, the landscape change. And I guess, because now you've joined another startup and those stats are phenomenal. So you're obviously doing something right in how many songs you're being able to build on the platform. I can imagine the capacity must be huge, and that's probably got to be one of your biggest challenges or goals, I guess, of how you can hold so much while creating the best service. What's your thoughts on emerging tech? What excites you when you're looking at the roadmap for Primephonic?
At Primephonic, well, I think like you said, I think AI, it seems to be the topic of the moment, right? Or at least for the past few years. I think it's hard to predict what the future is going to look like, right? I wish I could. So I think if you look back, it seems like every year there's kind of the new sort of hype, right? There's AI. We're going through the AI. I wouldn't say we're going through the AI boom right now. I'd say we're kind of past that excitement boom. I think we're at a moment now where the promises need to start kind of delivering. Right. I think go back a couple of years, there were a lot of promises being made about AI is going to change the world, right? And then as it turns out, well, AI is being used, at least at the consumer side, for not so much like revolutionary things, right? We see cool things, but I think not so much life-changing applications so far, right? So I think if I look into what excites me when it comes to AI, what I would hope AI brings is actually better quality for people, right? So I can imagine AI being applied to, for example, in the field of medicine or a diagnosis, right? So if you look at I think there's already been some studies about how, based on your Google searches, right? If you show a certain trend, a certain pattern, you can those can be like early symptoms for detection of some diagnosis, right? If not to get too much into like a Black Mirror episode, but I can imagine, the technology is sort of already there to kind of live in a world where, maybe you wake up, you go to the bathroom, you're brushing your teeth, and then your combination of smart toothbrush plus the mirror notices that you have baggy eyes. Now there's a trend of you've had baggy eyes for the past 2 weeks, and you seem to be replying to emails at very late hours of the night. So there's like a consistency. There's a trend showing maybe a possible breakdown, right? Yeah. Those kind of things. I think that would be cool to actually build AI in things that can kind of predict what right now depends on us, right? I think that a lot has been done also in the field of AI in medicine. But when it comes to a diagnosis, it's still it depends on you feeling that something's off and going to the doctor, right? And maybe that's too late, or maybe you don't even know. So maybe to have, and I think we're seeing the first signs of that, right? With I think that the first start is kind of the activity trackers, where you see, well, it's still very early stages, right? You see a very basic monitoring happening. But I think if I look at where would AI have like a really useful case, and that's actually meaningful to society, and not just Snapchat filters or a deep fake where you can talk like Elton John or John Travolta, right? Which is cool, right? But it's that's what I hope kind of the technology moves towards.
Yeah, and well, I think that's really poignant, because it is right. There is so many good aspects that we can get out of technology, and the health tech industry, and using it to be able to spot signs and dementia and other things that are ever prevalent. I couldn't agree with you more. And so
and I think
sorry.
No, just one final comment. I think unfortunately, I think also AI has taken a little bit of at least in the mainstream, kind of a negative connotation, right? Because of companies like Facebook and stuff that have been a lot in the news nowadays. AI is now being thought of as companies kind of using excessive tracking mechanisms, and you're being monitoring for a bunch of different purposes, which seem to benefit the companies but not the individual, which is a little bit unfortunate, right? Because that same technology can be used to benefit individuals as well. So I hope in the next couple of years AI actually sees kind of a more positive use cases.
Yeah, and that is a fair balance, definitely. And so when you're looking at the tech stack of your business of Primephonic, what's the tech stack, and B, when you're thinking about graduates and the skills that you look for them, how would that relate?
Yeah, so I think our tech stack, we're quite a young company. I think the first line of code of the current platform was probably written about 3 years ago. So still quite young, quite fresh. So I think in that sense, we're lucky to have a very fresh tech stack that's very attractive to young candidates, right? It's based, of course, everything's based on the cloud from the start. We use a lot of Amazon AWS solutions, from servers to databases to containers. On the programming side, it's mostly Node.js, JavaScript, TypeScript on the product side. And then on the data science engineering side, it's mostly Python. We also use some AI, of course, to build things like automated recommendations, personalized recommendations. We're using TensorFlow and a couple of other packages. So I think that tied to the fact that it is a streaming company, right? So with the streaming product itself is very, very technically challenging, right? I think that means our attractiveness towards candidates is also quite high, right? It's a cool industry, cool technologies. We have scaling challenges, so those are all things that kind of resonate, I think, with the engineering crowd.
Yeah. And so on that, with it being, a very fresh and, as you said, an exciting tech stack, do you look for, and have you, there's a whole lot of this about polyglot engineers. So a lot of the graduates now who are studying, in my day, you were told to study become a master of one language and make that your trade. And nowadays you get quite conflicting views where either people are saying, no, you need to understand multiple languages and make sure you're a polyglot engineer, versus still there's some people say, no, I want the best of a specific language. Where do you sit in that when you're thinking about future graduates and coming in? Should they be specialists or generalists?
Sure. So I think my take is that languages come and go. There are some programming languages that, of course, have stayed around. I'm thinking of Java, has been around since the 90s, and it's still quite used. There's, of course, the C, C++, which are still used in one specific niche. So I think there's definitely value in becoming, call it a master of those languages, if you want to grow your career in that path, right? And I think there's some technologies that actually require you to really know the language, right? If you go into embedded devices, you go into real-time applications, you really need to know that stuff, right? But I think for most of the products that are coming out of startups these days, I think the needs are more on the generalist side, right? It's not really about, take our case, for example, right? If you're the best JavaScript or TypeScript developer in the world, you probably wouldn't be a good fit for us, because we also require you to be good at 20 other different technologies, right? And it's everything from infrastructure, right? Because we're also bridging the gap between the traditional infrastructure, DevOps, and the developer. So you need to know how to deploy, how to monitor. You need to know how to debug. At the end of the day, you're using maybe 5, 7, 10 different technologies, right? You're using containers, so you need to understand how they all tie together, right? So I think in our case, we look for people that have a good solid foundation, right? That actually understand the principles of engineering, and we also recognize that maybe, especially in the kind of the JavaScript world, it's very trendy, right? So maybe today you are a React expert. 2 years from now, React is seen as the horrible framework which nobody wants to know. And it's happened before, right? It's happened with I don't even remember. Before React, but there's Ember. There was, anyways. Technologies come and go. So I think you have a better shot of being more on the general side.
Yeah. And again, I think I totally agree with you. When you are looking at embedded platforms or products even, and way real time, totally. But that polyglot engineering, it just seems to be so prevalent with the new skills. And so leading on then to the last part of the podcast, where it's the career advice to our graduates and a lot of the listeners. And the one thing I can happily tell you, but also a lot of people listening confirm this, is the startup world, the scale-up world. It's probably the most exciting stages of a tech business, when you really are wanting to learn. Like you said earlier, you probably get 10 years worth of education in 3 when you're going through so much change. But I guess you might also have to be a certain type of person, and B, companies look for certain types of people. So can you give advice for those grads who are wanting to enter the tech world and join a startup or a scale up? What's the 1 or 2 pieces of advice you'd give them to really help them stand out?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think I agree with you. The startup, I would recommend actually people to join startups, right? But I think it also needs to be aligned with what you want from your career, right? If you want, there are benefits to joining, bigger companies, more corporate. I would say if you're young and you're trading, you're basically trading time for money, I would say don't trade time for money, but trade time for knowledge. And I think the best way to get knowledge is joining a startup, right, where things happen way more dynamically than a corporate. But also be aware that I think you also need to ask yourself, it's at what point does this continue to make sense, right? Because it does take a lot of effort to kind of you're always on the edge, right, in startups. So I think another piece of advice would also be, especially for young graduates, they would be contacted by recruiters on a weekly or daily basis, right? And they will be offered more money, right? Because that's how the industry goes. And I think what I see happening is, at least with the past few years, a lot of graduates, they're looking for that next, the next financial gain, but without really thinking about the long term, right? So they may find themselves maybe 10 years, 15 years into their career. They've kind of reached that ceiling where they're making a lot of money, but then they haven't really gotten or acquired the level of expertise and knowledge that you would expect from a person with 10 or 15 years experience, right? So I say be aware of that. I think that sometimes you also need to sacrifice the short-term gains for the long-term gains, right? Because I think it is an industry, unfortunately, that it still suffers from ageism, right? You're 40 years old. Some companies see that as a negative, especially in the startup world, right? I think companies even brag about our average age is 22, right? I myself am 35. I'm probably one of the oldest people in my company, right? So you need to be aware of that is an industry where this thing happens. So so try to build your career around what you want, right? If you want to be a tech lead, or you want to be an expert in a certain technology, or you want to maybe be the main contributor of an open source project, make decisions that also will get you there in the long run. Right? Don't just chase the extra bucks that you will get.
Yeah, and I think both of those points are just really, really valid. I mean, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal your phrase, time for knowledge, not money, because I think that is so important. If you are young and you don't have dependents, and the mortgage isn't keeping you up at night, there is nothing more rewarding than actually learning and building that knowledge base that will set you up for not just the next 5 years, but as you say, the next 20, 30 years. And this is the time to do it now, isn't it? The learning curve should be the steepest at your younger age, and not to over accelerate in your career based on a paycheck, where you may be exposed, I guess is the right word, at a later point, because people who have learned the skills are going to be much, much more employable or more resistant to change, I guess, later down the line. So I think that's a brilliant phrase. If you don't mind, Henrique, that's going to be one of my taglines, I think.
Sure.
Well, look, thank you. That has been brilliant. I think that's a great way to to wrap up this podcast, where we can talk, where we've talked about how being a polyglot or being a generalist for especially for the startup scale up world is a real advantage. Yet we've acknowledged that that's only if that's where you want your career to go, and it may not be a career for everyone. And joining big tech and joining larger businesses also has its advantages if that's right for you. But where we've been focusing on for this podcast is around that place where it's exciting and you're on the edge, and graduates entering that market, you should enjoy the buzz and working with people like Henrique, who 35, you're younger than me, a lot younger than me, and got to a CTO level already. That's impressive. But I take it that you've done that the right way through the 15 years of going through the stages, and that's a great path to follow. So I think, to everyone listening, that's another episode, and a massive thank you to Henrique. Thank you.
Thanks again, Charlie. Really enjoyed it.
Great. And to everyone listening, yes, that's another episode of our Future Tech podcast. It's being streamed, actually it's not, it's being on the landing page of our 16 universities we're partnered with on the careers portal, along with on our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Spotify channels. So please log on, please have a look, please have a read and a listen. And to everyone, that's another episode of the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.